Welcome to constructing the slip pocket video. First thing that we're going to do is grab our 11 by 11 slip pocket, and I'm going to turn it to the back side. What we're going to do is we're going to measure 1 inch in from each of the side edges. Now, it could be any edge that you want. You could have it turned this way or you could have it turned this way because it is an 11 inch by 11 inch square. So it doesn't matter what orientation you choose. But if you have a printed fabric that is directional, like say for mine, I would rather have it going this way rather than this way. So what I'm going to do is measure from these sides. I want it to be horizontal this way. So these two edges are going to be the sides that I measure the 1 inch away from. So I'm going to flip it over. And on the wrong side, I'm going to measure 1 inch away from the side edge. And I'm going to make a mark down like that. And then I'm going to flip it all the way over and measure 1 inch away from the other side. Make another mark. Now for the next step, you can either use double-sided tape or you can press with your iron. But I know that a lot of people used waterproof canvas, which can't be pressed with an iron. And also, I'm in a position where I usually don't have my iron heated up and I don't want to wait for that. So I do use double-sided tape a lot. And what I just do is add a line of double-sided tape down the edge of the pocket. See here, right down the edge of the pocket where the line is. And along the other edge as well. And you're just going to remove the paper from the tape and fold these edges in to meet the line you drew. And again, you can press this with your iron if you don't want to use tape. So I removed the paper from the tape and I'm just going to fold this up. And that's going to meet the line that you drew. And I also like to roll this with a seam roller just to get a really nice, crisp folded edge. And also it helps to adhere that edge with the double-sided tape. All right, so now that I have both side edges folded in, I am going to take the raw edge on the bottom and fold it up to the top. So the slip pocket is now wrong sides together and the folded edges are on either side. And I'm going to line up those raw edges and I'm going to baste along the top here so that everything stays in place. Okay, so the top of my pocket is now basted together and the sides are still open. And what I'm going to do next is grab my slip pocket trim piece that we prepped earlier with the double-sided tape and the line down the center. And I am going to remove the paper from one of the lines of tape. And then I'm going to decide which side of my pocket I want to be my front. And I think I want this side to be the front of my pocket. So I'm going to lay that front side down and I'm going to stick it to the trim, making sure that the top edge of my pocket is just underneath that center line. You kind of want to leave a tiny, tiny gap in between the edge of your liner of your pocket with that center line, and that'll give it enough room to fold over the edge. So I'll show you here. There's a small tiny gap in between the line and the edge of my pocket. And that way, when you remove the paper from the double-sided tape on the other side of the trim and you fold this over, fold it over and stick it down, the edges of the trim should be about the same level. And I'll explain that in just one sec here. So now your trim is folded over the edge of the pocket. And what I mean by the edges being at the same level is this edge of the trim ends right where this edge of the trim ends. So when you top stitch this, there is no chance for the top stitch to go through the front, but miss this edge of the back. And maybe you're top stitching underneath this edge. So that's why we stick the liner panel down just underneath the line, because that'll give it enough space to fold over the top edge. So we are now going to top stitch this. And I like to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the bottom raw edge of the trim. And I start right here at the edge of the pocket liner. I don't start here at the edge of the trim. You want to back stitch at the start and stop. And since you backstitched, it is okay to trim those threads close to your stitching. So here is the top stitched front of my slip pocket trim. And you can see on the back, the top stitching was able to catch the entire way across the back of the trim as well. So next we are just going to snip off the ends that kind of overhang the pocket so that it's flush with the edge of the pocket. Next, in order to be able to stitch this pocket so that it is a separated slip pocket, we're going to mark a line that is 5 inches away from the side edge of the pocket and just mark it from top to bottom. And I'm using a friction pen, so this pen will disappear with heat. You can also use chalk if that will show up on your material. Okay, there's my line, and we are now going to clip this to our liner panel so that we can stitch it on. Here is our liner panel that we're going to attach the slip pocket to. We've already found the center of the top edge, and so I'm going to lay it down so that I can measure 2 inches from the top edge of the liner panel. And I'm going to do the same trick where I put my 6-inch mark on the ruler right in that center notch that we clipped. And that'll help me center this pocket where it needs to be. Okay, so I'm going to take my ruler away, and here's how I clip this pocket to the liner panel without using pins. So I'm holding the pocket down, and I am going to fold up this edge of the liner panel, and I'm going to clip it in place around the pocket. So these clips are holding the liner panel and the slip pocket. And without shifting the pocket, I'm going to turn this way, and I'm going to fold up the bottom of the liner as well and add a clip there. So it kind of looks like a little bit of a burrito or something like that, some sort of wrap. And I'm going to start stitching here right underneath the trim. And I'm going to backstitch as I start, and I'm going to go down this side of the pocket. And as I approach the bottom of the pocket, I'm going to unclip the bottom of the liner panel so that I can pivot and go across the bottom. And I'll show you how I do that as I go. So again, I'm going to start right here underneath the trim, and I'm going to make sure that I back stitch at the start and stop, but I'm not sewing on the trim at all because I'm going to be adding rivets later. So I'm going to sew down the side of the pocket, moving the liner panel out of the way as I go. And as I approach the bottom of the pocket, I am going to unclip the bottom of the liner panel and pivot so I can sew across the bottom of the pocket. And I'm about to approach that center line we drew down the middle of the pocket. So once I approach that line, I am going to lift my foot and pivot so that I sew up the line towards the trim, and that will separate my slip pocket. So I'm going to sew up the line. And as I approach the trim, I'm going to lift my foot with my needle down and then turn this all the way back around so I can sew down that same line. And then once I approach the bottom again, I'm going to pivot once more and finish sewing across the bottom of the pocket. And once I approach this side, I'm going to unclip that part of the liner and then sew all the way to the corner and pivot. Let's get a little bit closer to the corner actually. There we go. And go up the side of the pocket. Now I'm going to again stop right before I stitch onto the trim, and I'm going to back stitch here. Okay, here is the stitched slip pocket, and next we are going to add some rivets to secure the top of the pocket. And what I like to do is add a rivet to each side of the pocket and also in the center. So I'm going to take a marking pen and I'm just going to kind of estimate center of the trim right over that side line of stitches. So right above that line of stitches and centered on the trim. And I'm going to do the same thing at the center here, centered on the trim and above that line of stitches, and again on this side. And then I'm going to punch those holes for the rivet. Now punch through all layers. And then I'm going to turn over this panel and I'm going to add a fray check right here. Since I punched a hole through cotton, I like to add fray check here so that that hole doesn't eventually kind of grow and get bigger and fray on me. So the fray check will help that stay in place. And then I'm going to add my rivets through each of the holes that I made. And this next step is really important. You don't want to skip this. I have these little squares of Peltex that I kind of prep before every project, and I've punched a hole already in the center of these. And I want to use these to stabilize my rivet. So I'm going to just add these to each of the posts of my rivet. And what that is going to do is help strengthen the cotton so that when you're getting into this pocket and maybe you're pulling a little bit, that rivet has more to grip onto than just the cotton panel. And you want to do this even if you're using like strong waterproof canvas, and that way the rivet won't pull through the hole or it won't start ripping a hole in your material. So I've added the caps to each of these rivets and I'm gonna go press them. And here is my completed slip pocket with rivets that have been stabilized on the back side.